On April 19, 1775, Major John Buttrick commanded his colonial militia in Concord, Massachusetts, to fire on regular British troops, ordering the shot that was heard around the world, and initiating an 8-year international war involving, of course, the American colonists and British, but also Germans, French, Spanish, and, believe it or not, Texas Cowboys. Yet, there were only 13 colonies that declared independence from Great Britain in 1776, and Texas was not one of them. Plus, Texas did not become a part of the United States until 1845, and only became an independent republic in 1836, 53 years after the American Revolution ended. So, you might ask, just how did Texas Cowboys help save the American Revolution? Well, our story begins in 1691, when Texas emerged as a province of New Spain, called the Province of Texas. As part of the Spanish Empire during the American Revolution, Tejano Patriots drove Texas Longhorns to feed Spanish soldiers fighting the British in the Revolution's Third Front on the Gulf Coast, from Manchac to Baton Rouge, Mobile, and finally in Pensacola. Before Spain's Carlos III declared war on Great Britain in 1779, he ordered the governor of Louisiana, Bernardo de Galvez, to funnel war supplies and money to the rebels via the Mississippi River. Like France, Spain was initially reluctant to support the American colonists, especially following General Washington's embarrassing evacuation from Long Island. Nevertheless, the French and Spanish both hoped to avenge their losses from the 7 Years' War. The American victory at the battles of Saratoga provided the opportunity to do so, convincing France to make an alliance with the rebels in 1778, while Spain joined the following year when their silver fleets returned. After declaring war in 1779, Carlos III again turned to Galvez to open a third front in the war against the Redcoats along the Gulf Coast. Galvez, in order to feed his army of 7,000 men, turned to Spanish Texas to acquire a mobile commissary of Texas Longhorns. Galvez knew that a successful army needed food, and he knew where to find it: in Texas. Spain held 3 civil settlements in the province of Texas during the American Revolution. One at San Antonio de Bexar, present-day San Antonio, a second at La Bahia, present-day Goliad, and a third at Nacogdoches. Since the Spanish took cattle everywhere they went, there were great herds of cattle roaming the ranches in the Bexar-La Bahia region by the mid-1700s. These longhorn cattle proved critical in supporting this fight, and Spanish vaqueros, or cowboys in the province of Texas, drove up to 15,000 heads of cattle between 1779 and 1782 on a 500-mile cattle drive from San Antonio de Bexar to Opelousas, Louisiana, to feed Galvez's soldiers. Galvez, however, faced a problem. In 1778, it was forbidden to export cattle to a neighboring province, which meant he could not deploy this mobile commissary from Spanish Texas to Spanish Louisiana. But Galvez had a plan. To acquire these Texas Longhorns for his army, Galvez sent Francisco Garcia to San Antonio de Bexar with a letter formally requesting Texas Governor Domingo Cabello to authorize the first official cattle drive out of Texas. Garcia arrived in San Antonio on June 20th, 1779, but at first, Governor Cabello was skeptical, saying, "This really isn't practical." Fortunately for Galvez and the American revolutionaries, Cabello relented after receiving a letter from the Commandant General of New Spain, Teodoro de Croix, who advised Galvez, "Because dispatching this livestock is expedient to the service of the king, I dispose that your lordship proceed immediately, taking care that the number of beasts includes sufficient bulls, so that the livestock may procreate in that region, La Louisiana, and so that the breed does not become scarce or extinct in that province." A friar and president of the Texas missions at the Mission of San Jose, Fray Pedro Ramirez de Arellano, was pivotal in securing donations of cattle from the missions and private ranches throughout the Bexar-La Bahia region, and Mission Espirito Santo of La Bahia made the largest donation. With a cattle population around 40,000 Longhorns, the missions and rancheros of the Bexar, La Bahia region donated 2,000 heads of cattle to make the first long-distance cattle drive in the history of Texas. Followed by Spanish soldiers for protection, Texas Cowboys drove these Longhorns more than 500 miles and faced several dangers, including multiple river crossings, cattle rustlers, attacks from Comanches, lack of shelter, and inadequate drinking water. Despite the hazards, these early Texan cowboys successfully delivered between 9,000 and 15,000 cows in at least 12 drives between 1779 and 1782 to feed Spanish troops fighting for American independence. Texas's revolutionary cattle drives from San Antonio to Opelousas followed the El Camino Real, the King's Road, to Nacogdoches, where it continued to Natchitoches in Spanish Louisiana. From Natchitoches, the Texas Cowboys drove their cattle to Opelousas, Louisiana. The cattle drive crossed the Guadalupe, Brazos, Trinity, and Neches rivers, along with numerous creeks before crossing the Sabine River into no man's land, or present-day west central Louisiana, known as the place where the cowboy met the pirate. This neutral zone was mostly uninhabited by the Spanish and French, and at 50 miles wide, it ran north on its western edge along the Sabine River from the Gulf Coast to present-day Logansport, about 45 miles southwest of Shreveport, while it meandered along its eastern edge from present-day Cameron to Lake Charles, Natchitoches, and ending near Kingston. The cattle drive technically ended for the Texan Cowboys in Opelousas, Louisiana, where soldiers from Galvez's army took over and drove the cattle an additional 60 miles east to the Mississippi River and then shipped them to New Orleans to be distributed among Galvez's forces. Many have questioned whether the initial cattle drive in the summer of 1779 actually made it. Historian Robert H. Thornhoff discovered clues in the Bexar County archives about the cattle drive's success, including a fascinating story about a shopping trip to New Orleans. The initial drive encountered difficulty from the beginning. Francisco Garcia, who the Texans expected to take charge of the herd, actually returned to Louisiana after securing the deal with Governor Cabello without waiting on the herd. Second, the El Camino Real from San Antonio to Nacogdoches had been cut off by the Comanches for several years. So, rather than driving northeast, the Cowboys drove their cattle south and then east until they joined the La Bahia-Nacogdoches Road, allowing them to continue on their track. But it was a letter from Texas Governor Cabello to Commandant General Croy that has led many to believe that the initial drive was a failure. The cattle should have arrived in Opelousas in August 1779, but in March 1780, Governor Cabello wrote regretfully to Croy that Galvez, the governor of Louisiana, has concerned me, for he has not answered the letters I have written him about the subject of the cattle. Yet, Galvez could not have responded to Cabello's letters because, at the time, he was fighting the British in Mobile. According to Thornhoff, there was another reason why Cabello had not received news of the cattle's delivery. Those responsible for delivering the cattle to Opelousas on that first drive took a shopping trip to New Orleans after they delivered the cattle, which delayed their return home until April 1780. Governor Cabello was not happy when they returned with fabric and tobacco that the delinquents did not pay taxes on when returning to the province of Texas. So it seems that this initial drive did make it to Opelousas. Nevertheless, the subsequent cattle drives between 1779 and 1782 were indeed successful in bringing between 9,000 and 15,000 Longhorns to Opelousas. The Texas Cowboys, who drove thousands of Longhorns to Opelousas, along with Galvez's Gulf Coast campaign in support of the American Revolution, should not be a side note to the history of the American Revolution. Galvez drew British attention away from George Washington's army, and Spain's victory in Pensacola freed up the French to join the rebels in Yorktown against Cornwallis. And those Texas Longhorns themselves played a critical role in Galvez's success against the Redcoats along the Gulf Coast, who suffered from a critical shortage of food. Thanks to Texas beef, Galvez's troops had the energy in the Third Front of the Revolution to defeat a hungry British army helping to save the American Revolution. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe for more historical insights, and let me know in the comments what other stories you'd like to hear. For more about me or the sources used in this video, check out the description below. Thanks for watching, and see you next time on Our History Today.